Hello, I'm Joel.
And I'm Alex.
Welcome to the Commander's Journey, the place where we discuss our favorite format of Magic, Commander, from the perspective of a new player.
And an experienced one.
And this journey is for new Magic players interested in Commander. So today we're going to talk about the unwritten rules of Commander. There have been a few podcasts, different episodes out there in the internet sphere talking about this. It's been called a few different things like the social contract or the unwritten rules of Commander. And we're really aiming towards talking to new players, but we're also talking to casual EDH players, casual Commander players, about just some of the few unwritten things that we kind of all agree on.
Exactly. And, and for different players, these are different things, and I've heard a wide variety of what players don't like or not. I know there's two big ones that come to mind. One is more obvious than the other one. But really what it is when you're going to go into a new game, especially with a new play group, your own personal play group can do whatever you enjoy doing, whatever you guys like, that's the correct way to play. But when you go into an LGS, if you are worried about something or whatnot, just, talk to them, let everyone get into communication with each other and, what everyone's on board with. But we're also going to go into details on this episode about, I'm going to list some of the things I've heard people don't like, and I'm going to make an argument for why I still think we should have them in there. And, because I'm definitely almost all the other weird ones that I've heard before, I don't agree with.
Yeah, there's just these general kind of house rules that people abide by. That isn't really spoken of, but we all understand. But the biggest thing is communicate with the people, like you were saying at your LGS when you go there, especially for newer players like myself. You don't know who you're sitting down with. Say something, talk to them, tell them what commander you have, what kind of style you're playing, how long maybe you've been playing the game, how powerful you think your deck is, and then is this going to be a good fit kind of thing, because you could have like 2 or 3 groups playing and you might fit better playing. And I know I played with some people who played real fast and some players that had a bunch of really powerful cards in there. But most everybody at my LGS was really kind and helpful when I was playing. I let them know I just started. So it was like as I was missing triggers, they would tell me, oh, you missed that. Oh, you missed that. And it was really, really a good experience. So I would definitely encourage people, go to your LGS, communicate with the people you're playing with, because that's really where I learned paper magic, and it's just so much fun.
And that goes into one of the ones, and the lesser of the two, but definitely I think the most important one of the unwritten rules of Commander, which is make sure everyone's having a good time. Everyone's having fun. Often that means letting everyone kind of do the thing that their deck wants to do. Not saying you can't interrupt it. You can mess up the game plan. I think that adds to the fun. I think that adds to what the game wants to do. But, let everyone kind of do what their deck wants to do. If a guy's getting a little mono-screwed, I know for me anyways, I kind of let them catch up a little bit for better or for worse. So at least they had a good time. They don't sit there and, are out of the game for basically all of it because they got a little land screwed at the very beginning.
Yeah, so rule number 1, everybody have a good time.
Everybody have a good time.
That's rule number 1.
Whatever that ends up meaning, everyone have a good time.
And rule number 2, go back to rule number 1. Episode's over. Let's go. Oh, wait, no. We got a lot more to talk about. But yeah, that's really important, like what you just said. Everybody's here to have a good time. And I think one of the awesome things about Commander is it's the kind of game that's extremely strategic. It can be competitive, but it's also so creative, in Commander especially, where you build around your commander. You want to do all these awesome things that you don't just want to see what you can do with your deck. You also want to see what everybody else brought to the table, the cool things they can do. So I think that aspect, and that might be one of the reasons it's gained such popularity recently, but in Magic as a whole. But Commander's just fun, so everybody needs to have fun. Rule number 1.
Gotcha. Rule number 2, which is probably the main one that jumps to mind for everyone, this is the big one, is no mass land destruction. This
don't
is
blow
the
up
other
my
biggest
mana.
one. Don't do something that's going to
chunks.
destroy it all. Such as a card that we have, such as Armageddon, which is the go-to when we talk about land destruction. That is the card that comes to mind.
Yeah, because Armageddon's 3 and a white for a sorcery that just says destroy all lands. And I think what makes it just such a sour, bad feeling is like Commander's such a long game. You've been playing for like maybe 45 minutes an hour, and then somebody just Armageddon's, and it's like, well, you want to sit down for another 2 hours? Let's restart the game.
And it's a lot harder the second time around than it is the first rounds. Green recovers, I think, better than the other colors do because it has the ramp. But honestly, every color struggles to get back up to even close to what they were before.
Yeah, I've not run into somebody playing this because I think it's just such a general, like you said, understood thing that we just not going to destroy everybody's land. Now, I think targeting a land here or there for various strategic reasons is okay and generally accepted, but mass land destruction as a whole is the thing that's really a part of the social contract. People don't they don't like that.
And those are the two main ones. And those ones, again, both make sense to me. And since Joel brought it up, that is, we'll go into other effects that I have heard people not like in Commander. I want to make arguments for all of them why they should still, maybe convince someone the other way. One of them is just any land destruction whatsoever. So I've perused websites that people talk about Commander on. I've been to LGSs or different play groups and just kind of looked around and see what people think. And I've heard some interesting stories about what people like and don't like. One of them is just any land destruction whatsoever. And often I find a lot of people play their lands, like either have very powerful lands, which is why they don't like that, or maybe have a land that, they don't protect them very well, kind of thing.
Yeah.
There are effects in the game where you can protect your lands. They kind of leave them open. They don't want to destroy it. And often their whole game plan maybe hinges on a Gaia's Cradle or on a effect that a land has, maybe a Field of the Dead nowadays. And that they don't want that to be removed. But, of course, that's how you on the other side of the table can deal with that strategy.
Yeah. So, mass land destruction is definitely frowned upon, but any land destruction, it can feel bad if you're the one getting your lands blown up, but if you deal with somebody else's land too. So I think in small doses and for strategic reasons, I think it's acceptable. I didn't like the way it felt against me last time I played, and somebody was blowing up a land here or there because I was playing an Orzhov deck and I didn't have really good ramp out at the time. So it was like, it kind of impeded my strategy, but it made sense to the game because it's like, well, that one little play helped that guy jump ahead and take the game.
And I've had one or two effects that, will take out a land here that I don't run too much in my decks. Maybe because some people frown upon it, but I think it's more because I don't want to ruin my deck's game plan by having too much of that. But really what I think it does, and I put it in to deal with something like Gaia's Cradle or something that someone's getting too much value out of a land. But I have used it in a scenario where someone's, fixed their colors a little bit too much and I hinder a color to try to slow them down a bit, just keep them a little bit behind where they want to be. And I've gone that route before too, and I think that's totally valid.
Yeah, it is. And, or like you said, in Commander, there's a lot of utility lands we use that give special abilities, and if somebody's got something that's really, like you said, Field of the Dead or something that's really helping their game plan out a lot, it's not bad to run a little bit of land destruction. Like for instance. A card you could run is Strip Mine. It's a land that you tap it, you add 1 to your mana pool, or you can tap it, sacrifice Strip Mine, and destroy target land. So you can blow up that Gaia's Cradle or blow up that Field of the Dead that somebody has on the other side of the board.
And deal with it, absolutely. And again, I just because there are people that run those kind of cards, I think it's really important to have at least a little bit of land destruction, maybe not even all your decks, but on decks where they're a little more susceptible to it, or decks that you maybe run into it a little more. I think it is good to have in your deck, and that's my main argument for it. Is sometimes that's the only way to deal with something that they're doing, and you want to have it.
So it's not part of the social contract, but some people have argued that they don't like playing against that. But
another big one I've heard too, and this one comes up a lot, is some people really don't like having counter spells. And this one is one that I even have a harder time wrapping my hand around than the land destruction side of things. Because I've seen it, people don't like it. They feel like it takes all the steam out of their engine when you counter spell something. But my big argument for counter spells, and I think most people would agree, is this is how blue deals with things. Is before they even get them out, they counter it. And countering deals with some things in the game that nothing else can.
Yeah, and it's funny that as a newer player, I think people playing counter spells against me when I first started playing didn't necessarily feel very good, but it taught me how I needed to play more interactive. Like for instance, like I would play. I I think when I first built my first deck, my Tesa deck, I didn't have a lot of like interaction necessarily, and people would either counter or remove Path to Exile or counter spell some of the cards I'm playing, and I'm like, well, that stinks. That whole thing I was just trying to do right then and there. But it taught me how to go back to when I built the deck or tuned up that deck or built another deck. Is I got to have ways to deal with people's counter spells or maybe bait out a counter spell before I play the card I really want to play.
And honestly, if you're one of those players that really hates dealing with counter spells, there are a lot of cards in the game that says this spell can't be countered, your spells can't be countered. There are a lot of effects that give that rider, so you can play that game if you want, and then not have to worry about having the conversation. Well, I really don't like when you counter stuff, And I get what they're saying. They don't like the wind being taken out of their cells, but I think it is good. Again, this is how blue deals with stuff, and again, it helps keep the game from getting overwhelmed. And a good example of counter spell is just the spell counter spell. Blue, instant, counter target spell. I think we're going to run into that a lot on this episode. All our example cards of the strategy are going to be very short and simple.
And almost the same name. And I think just don't let yourself get too sour or worked up about it. Like I remember playing a bunch of different games, and I had a lot of brothers growing up. You play games, play card games, play games outside, and you can get very competitive and just too heated up about things. And you don't want to get yourself in that position. You just, somebody's doing something that you don't necessarily like, or let it be a learning lesson for you to go back and rebuild your decks so that you can deal with people's dealing with your lands or dealing with counter spells, and figure that out.
And I'm going to throw this out here too, for counter spells especially. What else, if you're playing mono blue, and there are things, you can have bounce, but bounce slows people down. It doesn't get rid of it. Mm-hmm. This is how you get rid of stuff. And if you need to, you can bounce and then counterspell, whatever you have to do. But, what else are you supposed to do in mono blue when someone has something big that you have to get rid of? You can slow them down with bounce, but how long is that going to last? They just play it the next turn, right?
Yeah.
It hinders mono blue very specifically, I think, when you get rid of counterspell.
Yeah, no, I don't think that would be necessarily wise. Another strategy you talked about here, you've heard people talk about, is discarding, right? Some people feel real sour about that as well.
Yeah, and discarding, I think too, is not in of itself. It's how black sometimes deals with things going for the hand. They have things like removal and whatnot, but if you notice, black has no way to deal with artifacts. Black has no way to deal with enchantments. This is how black deals with those things. They can make you discard it. And when you take that away, what is mono black supposed to do? They have to, the other option is try to win before it starts, messing you up kind of thing, which is no one really wants to play a rushed game of Commander when they might not have gone that strategy otherwise. This is how they deal with it. And taking that away makes it harder.
Yeah, it does. I mean, they still have ways to make you sacrifice things or remove your things, but
none of them, they say
it's sacrifice
a permanent, and it doesn't often include artifacts or enchantments. They just printed a black card that made you sacrifice an enchantment.
That's true.
It's real recent. It's not, they're just adding that to black's color palette specifically because it had two card types it couldn't deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a good example of that is Hypnotic Spectre. 1 black and black for a creature spectre with flying. Whenever Hypnotic Spectre deals damage to an opponent, that player discards a card at random. He's a 2/2, so flying in over people, that usually gets you some hits. And you cause people to discard.
And I think all of these two kind of come with the point. And I think what I'm learning from seeing this is people have trouble with a lot of these in mass. Sometimes I understand too, there are discard decks out there. There are more counterspell decks. I can see how the counterspell decks especially can be difficult, but you often with the discard decks, discard isn't really a win condition. You have to add other riders to the discard to win the game. Yeah. And at that point, that seems reasonable to me, especially too, a lot of discard effects can't happen instantaneously. You can always cast the thing in response to the discard happening in theory. Yes. If it's an instant or something like that. And if it's not, then, that's, what are you going to do? You have to wait till you draw an instant, then maybe deal with it,
Yeah, and again, find ways to be creative to get around this. Like, if you're going to play at an LGS, you might not know who you're going to be playing with. You got your play group, you might know the kind of players, what kind of decks they're bringing, how they play. But if you're thinking, oh, I'm going to have to encounter a bunch of discard decks, maybe put a bunch of cards there with that. Put a few cards in your deck that have that escape mechanic that we have
Yep.
now, or put a few cards with flashback, or have ways to recur, or things like that in your deck. And we always recommend at least having 2 recursion spells
Yep.
in your deck
Right here.
for this reason. So I think for me that's the big takeaway, and we're going to talk about a few more of these that people talk about. Is just let it be a lesson for you to learn to find new creative ways to deal and combat these things.
And if you're one of the people who really don't like discard, make your deck work out of the graveyard if it needs to. Don't make it a situation where you ever need to have something in hand you're casting from.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we talked about counterspells, you can play things that can't be countered. You can even in land destruction play a lot of things that give your permanents hexproof. Or give them indestructible. There are effects like that in the game. If you're worried about the thing or you feel a little more susceptible to them, just run a couple extra ones of those. And that could be your unique deck style. And that makes you a unique player. It's something that I don't like that. I don't want to have to deal with that too much. Let me build something in to make that a harder thing to happen to me.
Yeah, and if you lose a game to one of these types of strategies, instead of walking away going, "Gosh dang, that sucked," like be like, "Dude, what can I stick in my deck to deal with that next time?" And let it. And to me, that's the fun of it. It's like, no, I'm gonna find an answer for that guy.
Get
I'm gonna
creative.
come back next time. He's not gonna expect this.
There you go.
That's the takeaway.
So the other big one, we'll go. Or actually, there's 2 more that we have that I've heard of before. This one I understand too, and it's lock decks and stacks decks or whatever you want to call it. But they're ones that stop you from playing anything or swinging or doing something that locks you out of the game. Our example card is Winter Orb, which is for 2 generic mana. An artifact that says as long as Winter Orb is untapped, players can't untap more than 1 land during their untap steps. Now this really slows down the game, mind you. I get why it's frustrating. I get why it's annoying, but especially too, if just like with the other ones, I get if you're, having a whole deck built around locking, how that can be frustrating, but a couple here or there is completely reasonable. Maybe you have a slow deck that needs that time.
I think, I kind of have a personal feeling about this because I played against a deck that ran this, and really it drug the game on. I kind of wish that maybe that person ran into their combo. They didn't get to their combo so quick. But Winter Orb really can slow a game down. But again, like, find a way to counteract it. Like, it was frustrating playing against it, but coming out of it, I'm like, well, what can I stick in my deck that can deal with Winter Orb? I need some artifact removal in all my decks. And I think in that deck it was a Orzhov deck. I did have 1 or 2 pieces of artifact removal. It was just hard to get to it. But like having ways to deal with these things.
And sometimes that happens, you can't draw it, you didn't draw it. But keep in mind, Winter Orb also has the rider, if you tap it, then it doesn't deal with it, right? You can tap the Winter Orb to deal with it. You can remove the Winter Orb to deal with it. If it's a creature-based effect, which a lot of these decks sometimes have, or an enchantment-based one, remove the enchantment. You can, destroy the creature, even if you have to take in a couple extra turns because they slow you down, And think about it, too, from the other point of perspective. If I'm playing a deck, don't think about when you're running lock decks. Like, I don't usually, unless I really need to deal with something, like I'll throw a counterspell in most of my blue decks or, too. But, with a lock deck, too, I don't necessarily, if I want to be attacking or swinging in or whatnot, I don't really need to run too much lock in my deck, maybe none at all. But if I have a deck that wants to go slow, you know what I mean? Maybe I have an extra couple pieces. It's such a big deal because I have a way to win the game by, slowing it down.
Yeah. I think also just with casual casual EDH where we play, when you have a deck that's just all one-sided or very overpowered, it's just the whole deck is meant to lock you out, or the whole deck is meant to make you discard your whole hand every turn. or like you were saying, if it's like in mass, it can become a real feel bad pretty quickly for almost anybody playing.
And again, I think that's the lesson here, because it breaks one of the earlier rules we talked about. Everyone needs to have fun. When you play some of these things in mass, I think as a player, think about not feeling bad about a couple of them here or there, because that's just how the game is. I think it's important to build around them. And I understand how in mass it can be frustrating. But, if you really need to, you ask the other player not to play it. But, think about it too. It's if everyone's not having fun, is that the deck you really want to play?
I just thought of a really good analogy.
There you go. Let's hear it.
Stew.
Stew, okay.
Or soup, whatever. I mean, when
Or
you
a
prefer
broth
stew,
or-
no, stew or soup. If you don't want the people eating the soup, playing the game to be too salty, don't add too much salt. If you have too much of one thing, it's too salty.
And
so having all the different spices and a few different things here and there and being creative.
I guess I completely agree with you. A little bit of salt, that sounds great. It might, help add to the dish. Too much,
Exactly.
what are you going to do? And the last one is the one I have the biggest gripe with. I heard this one before actually a decent number of times, and I don't understand how these players play. No offense to those players, but I don't know how your game is balanced or function without it. And that is board wipes. I don't get it. Like, if someone gets too far ahead in the game, that is how you balance them out. And players that don't like board wipes, I assume it has to do with they don't like having their creatures being destroyed, but that's how the game balances, especially in a 4-player format. If someone gets too far ahead, that's how you bring it back into check, is with a board wipe.
But I think it might be referring to doing it in mass. Like if you're playing, say, just like a spell slinger deck where you don't have creatures, you're not playing creatures at all, and you're running like 15 board wipes or something like that, 10 or 15 board wipes, it can get pretty feel bad quickly. So again, just playing a few board wipes, it seems more like the thing to do, right?
Exactly. And we advocate for 5. That's our big thing, is 5 board wipes in our decks. I highly recommend you have it. That's how you make sure your deck's not really out of the game. But I've heard people, any board wipes is the problem. The one that's coming to mind is I heard about a player that literally they were playing a green stompy deck, and the second you board wiped, they didn't want to play anymore. And I was very surprised. And I was surprised their play group didn't have any board wipes that were cool with it. But I think their play group was a lot of big stompy creatures is why, and just who had the biggest stompiest one. Which, if that's how you want to play, that's how you want to play. But it's one of those things that even in mass too, I do think board wipes help self-correct a little bit better than the other ones, because it's hard to build a board wipe deck. Just because, I'm not saying you couldn't, but it would be hard to do, just because board wipes aren't really a win condition as much as they just make it so no one else can do stuff. But a lot of people don't just play creatures, so if they're not just using creatures, then you can win, with spells or whatnot. That would be a way to get around it.
Yeah, if you have no creatures in your deck, you're playing a whole different strategy or something.
Exactly.
But yeah, but I think those takeaways are good to note, is that not doing anything necessarily in mass. Understand that can get pretty salty pretty quickly if you're just continually hitting somebody in the same way over and over and over again. It's good to have some variance and some creativity in your decks.
Well, exactly. And, I think it's better to have a variety of things, focus on your main strategy, whatever your win condition happens to be, but then move on to the external things, such as, a couple land destruction effects here. If you're in blue, some counter spells, or black, some discard, maybe a lock effect or two if you need to have the game slow down a little bit for like a Super Friends deck or something that wants to slow it down. And again, board wipes, I put as many as board wipes in my opinion as your deck needs, but maybe sticking to the 5 is the takeaway from this.
Exactly.
Well, anyways, that ends our unwritten rules of Commander.
Yeah, so just to recap, rule number 1, everybody have fun. Rule number 2, don't do anything in mass.
Exactly. Any mass land destruction is frowned upon, and then making sure everyone have a good time. I think that all leads back to that.
Yes, for sure. So anyway, go have a great time playing Commander at your local LGS or with your play group, and just communicate. Keep this all in mind. Thank you for listening to us.
See you.